Hi, this is Dr. Balkan Devlen. I'm the Director for Center in Modern Turkish Studies, and this is Talking Turkey, our bi-monthly program in which we talk about Turkey, Turkish foreign policy, and the challenges Turkey faces in the world today. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Sitki Egeli to talk about Turkish defense industries and the challenge of defense technology and the role of defense technologies in Turkey's foreign policy today. Dr. Egeli is a military and security studies analyst teaching at Izmir University of Economics. Between 1991 and 1999, he served in Turkey's Undersecretariat for Defense Industries as Director for Foreign Relations, responsible, among other things, of arms and export controls. Between 2000 and 2015, he was a senior executive at an international consulting firm specializing in defense and aerospace industries. He also holds degrees from Boğaziçi University, University of Chicago, and Bilkent University in the fields of international relations and security studies. He has several books and articles on proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their delivery means, air and missile defense, security in space, arms and export controls, air power, and various regional security issues. Between 1993 and 1999, he was a board member of Turkish Aircraft Industries Incorporated. He is, as you can see, extensive experience in both academia, in the private sector, and at government, working on issues related to security, arms and weapons procurement and development, and beyond. So I can think no one better to talk about Turkey's defense industry, its meteoric rise in the past 10, 15 years, and what that means for Turkey's foreign policy today than with Sitki. Welcome to the show. Thanks. It was great having you here.
Thanks a lot, Balkan. And of course, with those wonderful, splendid comments, you only increase the expectations so much that I don't know whether I will be able to live up to them now.
I have no doubt you will.
I will try my best. I will try my best.
I have no doubt. Let me open up by asking you quickly to give us a broad overview for those who are not familiar with the Turkish defense industry and its development. It has been particularly on the papers with its production of armed drones and their operations in different theaters in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Libya, in Syria. But it has a broader story and the developments within Turkish defense industry in the past 10, 15 years have been quite impressive, but it has a longer story. Could you provide us with a sort of overview, a broad overview of the evolution of Turkish defense industry?
Sure, I will. To begin with, of course, Turkey having taken over the position of being a major state, the Ottoman Empire historically, and to have this legacy of a major empire, you would normally expect very substantial defense industrial capabilities, which surprisingly was not the case. When the Turkish Republic was established in 1923, it has inherited almost nothing in terms of defense industrial capabilities from the Ottoman Empire. I will not go into details why and how this happened, but one of the initial challenges and also priorities of the early cadres of the Republican era, what we call 1920s, 30s, all the way till mid-40s for Turkish decision makers and military, was to establish almost from the scratch an infrastructure in defense industries. So Turkey was one of the countries that could produce its own aircraft, some submarines under German license, the Nazi Germany at the time, a convenient relationship between the two, win and win for both sides. But those nascent capabilities were quickly lost after Turkey joined NATO in 1952. primarily due to US and NATO foreign aid, the ample quantities of weapons that started flowing to Turkey from its Western allies. And Turkey quickly lost most of its defense industrial capabilities. Then what a grave mistake that was very much realized in 1964-65 time frame around this Turkey's difficulties over Cyprus with its neighboring Greece, but also more importantly with the United States. And when the United States kindly reminded Turkey that the weapons it was receiving from the US could only be used in a NATO context against Soviet Union and nowhere else. So that was a wake-up call for Turkey. In fact, this has carried to Turkey into 1974 when an arms embargo was imposed on Turkey by the United States when Turkish military landed on the northern half of the island of Cyprus. So Turkey decided once more to develop its defense manufacturing capabilities starting from 60s. But those attempts were not fully successful. First, Turkey's financial capabilities were pretty much limited. Plus, it's the Cold War environment. I mean, either you cooperate with Soviet Union or with US. If US is not giving you the technologies you are seeking, there's anywhere else to get them from. So the golden era in this respect for Turkey's defense industrial push came starting from mid 1980s. When there was a military takeover and after the coup, the Turkish economy started opening up. It was the liberal economic policies and the trade barriers, investment barriers were all lifted, and the investors from all around the world were accepted with open arms. And those investors included defense industry companies, and Turkey developed this joint venture model. So the first big leap forward in Turkey's defense industry adventure was in the late 80s to early or mid 90s timeframe, when a number of joint venture companies were established together with European and North American partners, and they started producing under license some of the more important items, capital items that Turkish military needed at the time. Then came the 2000s, the period after 2004. By that time, there was already rapidly developing defense industrial base, and human resources were being generated, and ample funds are directed. And of course, I mean, you have to also see that in conjunction with Turkey's rapid economic growth and the growth of exports, meaning money, foreign exchange, foreign currency that could be spent for investment and buying weapons. So that was the period starting with 2003, 2004 with the AK Party, Justice and Development Party, coming to power in Turkey. We have to give them the credit as well, because developing defense industry capabilities in Turkey was a political priority for AK Party government, successive ones. And why and how we can discuss, but in addition to the joint venture model now, the AK Party also started attaching utmost importance to what they call the indigenous development, meaning Turkish designs, Turkish R&D programs, platforms developed from scratch by Turkish industries. Well, of course, they could achieve that to a great extent because the necessary base was already in place, was created during the preceding two decades in Turkey. And they had the human resources to allow for that. There was this complex network of relations with Western suppliers, joint ventures, and I mean, the companies knew each other. So it wasn't something like miraculous overnight. It was like a natural outcome, development of something that was initiated 30 years or 25 years ago. So that was the period starting with 2004 was probably the second big leap forward for Turkish defense industry. This has continued all the way to the present day. I would call, and what you see is Turkish platforms in a number of critical areas, like armed drones you have referred to. Naval vessels was one area, Turkish industry, shipbuilding sector, and defense companies supporting them were highly successful, and armored vehicles, and also the electronic in the field of electronic electro-optics, also some, and of course, on top of that, I mean, to catch up with the spirit of the revolution in military affairs, the munitions, the precision guided munitions, starting from laser guided bombs to miniature guided munitions and surface to surface guided munitions. So what we have today is a country where, uh, according to Turkish authorities, up to 70% of Turkey's requirements in armaments are met domestically. But this is the official figure, of course. Okay, I mean, there are various ways to look into that 70% figure, whereas like at the year 2002 or 2003, when this second big leap forward was initiated, the same ratio was around 35% at the time. So that the quantity or the ratio has almost doubled, which is like in 15 years or 18 years time frame. It's a pretty good achievement by any rate. However, if you start scratching the surface, of course, you start getting a different picture and also some signs of problems. But I don't know whether I should continue with that one.
Yeah, I think that sounds like actually quite an important point to maybe delve upon a little bit. Now, I don't think it's too technical, but I think if you can sort of unpack that 70% a little bit, what it is, what parts are we really sort of counting in that sense? Is that like joint ventures produced by others in Turkey? Would that count, or how much of that is really indigenous development to meet Turkey's defense needs? So how much of that is creative accounting, in other words, and how much of that is actual relative autonomy in terms of defense production and meeting the needs for that? Because as far as I know, and you'll know better, but Turkey is also a major defense importer, right? In terms of the weapons across the world, we're probably in what, top 10 in terms of
Top
as an
15.
importer, top 15,
Top
right? So
15. Yeah.
how does that work? And could you maybe get a little bit underneath that number and to see what is the composition of that 70% actually?
That's a good question, and it's also a difficult question, of course, because that's a pretty complex picture. It's not unique to Turkey. I mean, if you go deeper into the numbers, you start ending up with different interpretations, different outcomes, and none of them are correct or none of them are wrong. I mean, you probably have to draw your own conclusions. But let me perhaps take it in the following way. If you look at the figures for the year 2020, because we don't have the figures for this year, obviously, the turnover for Turkish defense and aerospace industries was roughly 11 billion US dollars. Okay, that's a good number. Okay, and of course, I mean, if this is the number on the basis of which the 70% figure is produced. I mean, Turkey's capital equipment requirements, and of course, you have to be careful about, like, not all of that 11 billion is for Turkish military. There are also exports. I mean, Turkey has become one of the important exporters, arms exporters more recently. So like around close to between $2 and $3 billion of that is for export markets, basically. But anyhow, so out of this 11 billion. And by the way, to strike to stress how striking the growth was, like back in the year 2002 or 2003, that turnover was around 1 billion. So it has grown by 10 times in the last 20 years or 19 years. Okay, but interesting enough, when you look at the figures, the defense industry is also importing items. And I'm using the official figures here, the figures of Turkish Defense Industry Manufacturers Association's figures, okay? And like if you look at the numbers, in the year 2015, Turkey has imported, the Turkish industry has imported items worth $1 billion. Whereas in the year 2020, that figure is more than $3 billion. So in 4 years, Turkey's imports, not by military, but by its industry, has tripled. More than tripled, actually, almost quadrupled. Okay? Now, 11 billion total turnover, more than 3 billion imported. So not all that 11 billion is made in Turkey. At least 30 to 40% are imported items. So if you apply that to the 70% figure, I did not have a very precise calculation to that effect, but God's feeling, you can tell the 70% figure automatically becomes around 50%. So around 50%, perhaps 45, perhaps 55. I don't have the precise calculations for that, honestly. Perhaps others did, but I did not come across. So the increase was from 35 to perhaps 45 or 50, which is not that dramatic from that perspective, if you think about the natural evolution of the defense industry. Now, is it normal that Turkey's imports tripled in the last 5 years? Well, that shows something. Yes, Turkey is successful in terms of developing manufacturing and also exporting high-tech, cutting-edge defense equipment nowadays. But like any other defense manufacturer elsewhere on this planet, it depends very heavily on other suppliers to do that. Because, well, except for the United States, probably nowadays, I mean, if you are producing cutting-edge weapons, you cannot produce everything yourself. You have to buy, if not the main platform itself, the subsystems or the ingredients of the subsystems elsewhere in the world. And this is exactly, I don't want to call it the trap, but the circumstances within which Turkey finds itself herself nowadays. Okay, yes, the more we develop our defense industry, the more technologically advanced it becomes, the more dependent you become on foreign suppliers, on this network of global network of suppliers. If nothing else, if you are selling like defense equipment to other countries, your other customers, be it Malaysia, Emirates, Qatar, Oman, or Turkmenistan, they don't care that much, the local content. They say, I want this radio, I want this particular gun, I want this particular electro-optical item on this product. So even you like it or not, you are forced to go and buy those items abroad from other countries. So this is one way to put it. So when you look at it in Turkey right now, the production for domestic and export markets, 1/3 of it, roughly, in fact, even more than 1/3 of it, is supplied by non-Turkish suppliers. Is
And
this
I
a
think this is,
vulnerability?
yes, and I think this is an excellent way to segue to. I want to highlight this vulnerability component because it I think it suggests two things: that the pursuit of a so-called sort of a complete autonomous and autarkic in a way defense industry is not a is not a feasible thing for pretty much everyone apart from the United States, I presume.
Correct.
Even with Russia and China, they do have a quite a closer production relationship and buying and selling of parts among them as well. But I think the important the component is how interdependent this this nominally domestic production is. And then of course the big question, the 800-pound gorilla in the middle, is that how the current spat between Turkey and the United States, particularly with Turkey being frozen out of F-35, losing with $10 billion worth of a market because of that, and the CAATSA sanctions and its knock-on of effects, not only cooperation with American defense industries, but also other allied defense industries, and how that might have an impact, what kind of a vulnerability that creates for the Turkish defense industries going forward. Because to me, it looks like it's a very major threat looming up there, and I'm not sure the consequences of that is broadly understood by the public, both in Turkey and elsewhere.
It sure is not correctly understood by the public, Balkan. I can tell you that, because there's this deceptive view that, I mean, we produce more and more ourselves, so we are not relying so much on foreign suppliers, which obviously and certainly is not the case. In fact, to make things even more dramatic, if you look at those imports, we said 1/3 of Turkey's domestic production relies on domestic the items imported from abroad. Well, I mean, out of that 1/3, another 1/3, you can say, like labor and added value in terms of like overheads and everything, the profits in the turnover. So like only 1/3 is supplied by Turkish company from that perspective. We are talking about the material wise. Now, to make things more dramatic now, if you look at the breakdown by the countries which are selling to Turkey, I'm talking about Turkish defense industry, because the capital items Turkey is buying, like F-16s and submarines and other things, that's another account. We are looking at the inputs to Turkish defense industry now. And guess which country is number one there in terms of supplying items to Turkey? It's United States, and its share is over 30%. Okay, so when there's something like CAATSA, it's not only Turkey being kicked out of F-35 or facing difficulties like the defense industry presidency, the strange name, translation at least, buying items from US, not being able to buy items. That's only one aspect. It has a very deep impact on Turkish companies whose imports are not readily visible because they are below the surface. Actually, it's part of the Turkish defense industrial activity and its dependence on foreign suppliers. And there, United States today provides 30% of what Turkey buys in terms of those systems, subsystems. I mean, what we call the vertical structure of the defense industry. Okay, and you go down from a product. So, I mean, this is number one aspect. The number two aspect, we always think of Turkey buying or Turkey importing. What about Turkey exporting? Because CAATSA and other things, as we have seen in the F-35, you pointed out, Turkish industry lost up to $12 billion in orders that were contracted in the previous years under the F-35 program. They are all gone. Okay, Turkish suppliers are quite unfairly locked out of the program. The investment has been made with government credits and everything. So that's the loss. So when you are talking about the $11 billion turnover, this includes $2.5 billion in exports. Now, interesting enough, within that $2.5 billion, roughly 35% of Turkey's exports are again going to United States. So when this is being cut out, you also start suffering in terms of the volume of your production. Now, we have the first figures coming out. In the year 2019, Turkey's defense exports was 2.7 billion US dollars. 2020, 2.3, 15% decline immediately. This year, with the CAATSA taking effect more deeply, I would expect the US exports and probably new orders from Europe and other parts of the world to start continue drying out. In fact, drying out faster and faster. Why? Because a lot of the companies buying from Turkey who have been buying so far will have second thoughts in order not to risk their relationship with the biggest, the 800-pound gorilla in the field is United States in this respect. No one wants to risk their relations, import or export ties with them. So overall, the impact, we have been warning about that for a couple of years. I mean, I made that warning some 3 years ago in a newspaper. They put it in the front line, the main page. F-35 is, S-400 is going to be the most costly defense acquisition ever for Turkey. And we are already seeing that, in my opinion. It's not the monetary value, it's not even the political ramifications, negative impact so far, but also on the Turkish defense industry overall. So, and on top of that, of course, perhaps since we are looking at the problematic part now, Balkan, we have to look some of the other problems that Turkish defense industry is facing nowadays. And a lot of them are in fact avoidable, but became unavoidable in the process because of Turkey's foreign dealings. Now, my very respected friend and colleague, Arda Mevlitoğlu, in fact, is the one who really excels in those kinds of studies, and he keeps very close watch of Turkish defense industry dealings, interactions with others. In February, he published a interesting article in Italy by, I believe it was CESPI to have published it. He draws our attention to three challenges, to three bottlenecks that Turkish defense industry is faced with nowadays. Number one is Turkey's tumultuous foreign relations. The fact that Turkey has got problems in every possible country on this planet, now, in the past, or for the future. Okay, and this is causing delays in programs. This is increasing the costs. This is increasing the uncertainties, and it is also costing Turkey very hard to get export markets. We have lost Egypt, we have lost Emirates, we have lost Saudi Arabia, we have lost Jordan, Kuwait, and European countries, and now US market. Okay, what else is left, basically? I mean, you cannot survive only by selling to Turkmenistan or Qatar or Azerbaijan. It's not enough. If you try to be a defense exporter, which you need to, for a country like Turkey, your domestic market will not be enough to sustain a large defense industry otherwise. So you have to sell. That's unavoidable. If you cannot sell, either your unit cost will go up, or I mean, you will not have the kind of capabilities that you are trying to get. This is number one problem. Turkey's foreign relations is probably the biggest problem Turkish defense industry is faced with, both in terms of imports and in terms of the export markets. Number two is Turkey's current financial strains, of course. Turkish economy is not doing well. This is not a secret. The currency exchange rate is fluctuating so deeply and normally in the negative direction. So this is decreasing the amount the Turkish government has got available for defense industry, be it R&D, be it procurement acquisition, okay? And Turkey has been financing a lot of its weapon purchases from abroad using loans, credits, the Hermes credits from Germany, FMS from United States, and the ones from France, whatever. Even with Russia, they are using. When Turkish economy is that weak, it is becoming virtually impossible to find fresh loans to finance defense industry or defense acquisition. This is number two problem, okay? The financial strains. And the number three problem, Arda is drawing our attention, is brain drain in Turkey's defense industry. The young people, the young engineers, the bright guys, that is probably the crux of the matter, the most important ingredient of any defense industrial sector. They are leaving Turkey. Not because the salaries are not sufficient, not because they are not happy in Turkey with the working conditions. Well, they are unhappy because of the political interference more and more with defense industry. On top of it, uh, a lot of them, there were interviews. It's not me. It was the Turkish parliament to have investigated the issue. They talked with several hundreds of those people, and the number one answer they give why they leave Turkey to go to the Netherlands, Canada, or elsewhere, they say, Turkey is not anymore the country I want to grow my kids. It's not free. There are no freedoms. It's not safe. It's not a state of law and order. So, I mean, the educational system is breaking down. Ideologically, it's becoming a different creature nowadays. So, this is the third big drain on the Turkish defense industry. But I can add more. I mean, with due respect to Arda, I can come up with several others. I mean, transparency, accountability, competition, it's missing, it's gone. It was there 10 years or 15 years or 20 years ago. We don't know how the decisions are made. We don't know which companies awarded with what, on the basis of what, for how much. If you don't know those things, if you don't see that, no one is going to invest except for those government or presidential cronies closest to Mr. Erdogan. Okay, this is number one thing. The number two, I mean, look at Turkey's most recent defense acquisitions. We bought S-400, 2.5 billion US dollars off the shelf. Well, I mean, on the one hand, you are been trying with your blood and your nails to develop your defense industrial capabilities. Then the most costly capital items, you go and buy them off the shelf without adding a bolt. Now they are talking of Su-34, 35, whatever, as Russian fighter, Sukhoi fighter. Hey, come on! I mean, this is perhaps 5 or 10 billion US dollars. If you give that money to Russia, that means there is no money left for your defense industry. Okay, and it's unbelievable that the Turkish public, the public debate in this country, or even the decision makers, they don't see that, or they prefer not seeing it, not turning a blind eye to this dimension. It runs contrary. This is what Turkey did in the 1950s when it joined NATO. There, it was for US. Now, for whatever sake, it is in favor of Russia. Okay, and on top of it, lack of prioritization. I mean, Turkey has limited resources. We are not United States. Our defense expenditure is less than $20 billion, probably 15 on today's dollar exchange rates. It's going down by day. Okay, you are not United States with over $600 billion. It is 30 times, 35 times what you can spare for defense. So you cannot match their capabilities. So you have to be selective. You have to pick the areas that really matter for you. You cannot produce submarines, satellites, main battle tanks, fighter aircraft, helicopters, artillery, electronics, and all at the same time. You have to be selective, and this does not exist at all. Now we have this scheme to go to moon. I mean, of course, it's not defense, but it's very much related in terms of the human pool and the technological pool that you will be needing and using in the process. And then I mean, last but not least, when you are trying to export, there's one trap we don't see in this country again. I mean, if your defense industry becomes too dependent on exports, this starts becoming a stumbling block or liability for your foreign policy, especially if the cronies or figures politically very much closely connected to government are also the ones which are producing, which has started to become the case in Turkey nowadays, the son-in-law and the best friend and the cousin and the family friend, whatever producing, well, they will exert very considerable lobbying pressure on the government to continue selling. And you will end up selling to countries which are tricky, to countries which are risky. There's a risk that those weapons could be turning against you sometime in the future, the big dilemma of any defense exporter, or you are under pressure to sell weapons at subsidized cut rate prices to benefit the recipient country and together with it the supplier, politically linked supplier. Those are all the problems. I can multiply. If you let me, I could go on forever. So I stop here. I give the word back to you now.
But I mean, this is an excellent overview of the problems facing, and perhaps it might not be too much of an exaggeration to actually describe the current posturing by the Turkish government and the success of Turkish defense industry as more of a paper tiger than people actually realize, with all the vulnerabilities and the problems and long-term problems that are inherent. It's not only what Arda was talking about, but what you add, especially with regards to the problems with transparency, accountability, competition, in addition to the brain drain and the need for exports. And I think I want to actually touch upon that export component and link it to something that has been on the newspapers here in Canada as well, and that is to do with the armed drone exports of Turkey, and how the complicated nature of those exports and how they're being used in different battlefields, and how that can actually have an impact on Turkey's relations with its allies. In the past few months, the 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 Turkish drones, the use of Turkish drones in Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan has been on the newspapers here in Canada, because they those drones were using Westcam produced targeting cameras, which were apparently one of the sort of the conditions for those exports licensing was that they are used for Turkey and not necessarily for re-export afterwards, that created a whole sort of political crisis and calls for arms embargo and suspension of the sale of those cameras, which you can talk more on that, but are essential for those drones to function for target acquisition and other aspects. So that the whole pressure to export, because the number of export markets are declining, and there are political reasons why Turkey is engaging with those exports, but also creating a lot of other political ramifications across the alliance. Could you talk a little bit about sort of this, particularly in the with reference to the armed drones and their use, or their sort of place of honor in Turkey's foreign policy, from Nagorno-Karabakh to Syria to Libya, and the use of drones at the very, very, very front and center. What are the implications of that, both in terms of defense industry, but also for Turkey's foreign policy? What are the dangers that are inherent in this sort of hyped up focus on the drone component of it? I know this is a very big question, and we can spend hours talking about it. But because of the particularly the connection with the Canadian exports, this is something could relevant and interesting for our audience here as well.
I will try my best, Balkan. As you said, that's a very large question, and I will probably pick some of the cherries from the top. But well, the drones. Turkey, of course, has been one of the first countries to have started operating drones. Very few people realize that. Besides United States and Israel, in the early 1990s, Turkey acquired drones from United States, the male category, so-called medium and altitude, long endurance, and used them in its internal security operations in the southeast of the country to great effect, in fact. And those drones kept flying till mid 2000s. And then on the basis of the experience gained and how valuable those drones proved, Turkey defined a requirement very early on in the late 1990s to buy huge quantities of drones. And when the AK Party government came to power in 2003, that was an ongoing competition for local production of drones, and the Israelis and the Americans were in competition. There were no others to talk of in that period. And then the dramatic decision was made to cancel that joint production tender or competition in favor of developing those drones from scratch by Turkish companies. And in fact, we three companies, but two of them are at the forefront. One government owned, the other one private. And they were both successful, but probably the private sector one has been more successful. And there was lots of negative propaganda nowadays that, I mean, perhaps, I mean, some listeners of ours will know that the son of the owner of the company also happens to be the son-in-law of Turkey's president. But this happened afterwards. It was the company did not grow because the son or the chief engineer of the company was married to the daughter of President Erdogan. It was the other way around. I mean, they started a development, a very creative, very successful company, and they came up with good products. They started meeting Turkish military's needs after a big struggle, lots of obstacles, stumbling blocks that they had to overcome. And only more recently, their fortunes turned around a little bit, but it was not probably only due to the marriage or any marital status of the company. It was more a well earned success of the company, technically, technologically. Now, what Turkey did, I mean, it was drones on the one hand and the smart munitions they carried on the other. And on top of it, some electronic warfare and electronic industries capabilities on the third hand. Okay. Those three developed hand in hand during the last 10, 15 years. Turkey has an advantage, a comparative advantage compared to like well-established defense industries, countries like United Kingdom, France, Germany, or Canada, where you have industries dating back by 50 years, 75 years. You have to keep generating orders for them. A lot of the money goes to categories of equipment which are not very much effective, let's put it this way, not critical in modern warfare. Whereas drones, the smart munitions, cheap ones, but very accurate ones, which are achievable nowadays, those are the kind of capabilities that Turkey could develop because, I mean, in other areas there wasn't much, and those were the areas Turkey has handpicked very wisely, very cleverly to invest in and put on the table a kind of solution which really caught with the spirit and with the technological trend of today in modern warfare. And this is like basically drones, pretty cheap, inexpensive as compared to its American Israeli counterparts. Okay, I'm talking about the Bayraktar series, the Baykar drones, and very good communication and networking defense electronics capabilities to link them to each other, but also with assets on the ground. very precise, up-to-date defense electronic warfare capabilities to assist their operations, like by jamming the air defense systems, by jamming the other side's drones and all that. Okay. And on top of it all, uh, munitions, weapons that those drones could carry, which are not available on the market, at least not to buy. If you are trying to buy small weapons, only the Chinese have got them. It's always a question mark how reliable they are. The Turkish ones are definitely more reliable because they draw on Western technologies, Western ingredients, those smart weapons that Turkish drones are carrying. Now, Turkey used those drones first in Syria, in Idlib, uh, then in Libya last summer at great success to turn the tide on the battlefield. And most recently, the Azeris used the drones they bought not only from Turkey but also from Israel. In fact, the Israelis perhaps they had at least a longer history of selling their drones and other unmanned systems to Azerbaijan. Okay, so in those three theaters, Turkey achieved big success in terms of hand-picking the targets, destroying air defenses, taking out the most critical targets of the enemy. Even if a lot of drones were lost in the process, that didn't matter. There's no human life at stake. They are comparatively cheap, expendable in a way. You can replace them because they are local. You don't need to go and beg for them from another country. But even there, there's a caveat. You have to be careful because those drones, the technologies that Turkey has so intelligently exploited, used in those conflicts, may not be that successful in the next conflict. There is a trap there, or there is a danger. Why? Because the particular circumstances of those three conflicts, the drones could operate from the safety of air bases which were not directly threatened by air power. In the case of Idlib, they were flying from inside Turkey, and Syrian or Russian Air Force would not dare hitting Turkish air bases inside Turkish territory. In the case of Azerbaijan, neither Azerbaijan nor Armenia used their air forces in the conflict. Again, the drones, the bases from which they were operating were off hands. Again, in Libya, the opposing side did not have an air force. There were drones. They tried a few times to attack Turkish bases, but it didn't succeed. They were shot down. Okay. If anything, it was the Turkish surface-to-air missile presence, which was probably stronger in Libya. The problem is, well, and on top of it, of course, I mean, the Turkish operators, I would call it, they were not Turkish, but you can call them proxies. In the case of Libya, you can are definitely Azerbaijanis. In the case of Karabakh, in the case of Syria, it was the Turkish military. They were very effectively using those network-centric warfare tactics of linking drones to artillery, to rockets, to aircraft. Drones were pinpointing the targets. The aircraft were dropping the munitions from 100 kilometers away. So it was a true network-centric battle model that surprised a lot of the observers. They were there forever. The 2 decades or so, we already had those technologies, but Turkey excelled at exploiting them in the conflict. The trouble is, Balkan, in the next conflict, if you are up against a rival with a potent air power, fighter aircraft, for example, using effectively electronic warfare against you, because the drones are, after all, you rely on electronic links to fly them, to communicate with them, okay? The outcome risks being pretty different. So you have to be careful. I mean, like 1967 success of Israeli military against the Arabs resulted in 73 in almost a defeat because they became overconfident in the tactics they develop. I see the same danger with the drones. You have to be careful. I mean, there are contexts, circumstances they are good at and successful. But if you try to use the same weapon, the same tactic in all scenarios, you are taking big risk. You have to be careful there. And
I think the this particular vulnerability makes the S400s and the following F-35 such a big blunder, because you would know a lot better if F-35 is the whole idea is a network. I mean, it's just not a plane that drop bombs. I mean, it is a flying sort of network centric. It's supposed to be the center of a network centric air operation, and being left out of that. Is actually a big vulnerability going forward when you end up facing a peer with similar capabilities, but you're missing that protection, air protection, in other words, and of course the associated air defense to protect the whole setup for yourself, right? So it makes it even a bigger blunder.
This is a very valid, a very good point, Balkan. Indeed. I mean, Turkey has achieved its most recent military successes thanks to linking assets together and using them as a mesh, as a network. Whereas the same Turkey is buying S-400, which it admits will be used standalone. The same Turkey nowadays is talking about Su Sukhoi 34 aircraft, which will not communicate with the rest of the Air Force, Army, or Navy. So the success on which they depend, and they were so good at creating, perhaps they don't really appreciate how critical this network-centric aspect was or has been in Turkey's recent successes. And if it goes on like that, you have this patchy inventory of non-talking to each other assets, and you will find yourself in the shoes of Armenia rather than Turkey in your next conflict. I mean, this is the big danger I see in Turkey's on and off-the-shelf purchases, haphazard decisions for defense acquisition, which is very tricky and which could turn out to be costly, not only financially but also geopolitically.
I mean, I think it's the what you highlighted, that it was a good sort of niche for Turkish defense industries to focus on the drones and the electronic warfare and the precision munitions and combining them. So it was a smart and early move into a market that is just emerging and can establish Turkey as an important player in that three interlinked modern modern warfare systems, and a very good niche. But the failure to link that into a greater strategy, and how the other parts of both defense procurement and defense strategy, and both the air, the navy, and the land forces, and how they're linked. I mean, to me, that's it looks like it's a big missed opportunity. Once getting lucky to identify that early emerging niche, investing in it and bringing it at somewhere, but wasting that opportunity because you don't have an overarching sustainable long-term thinking, and rather than hodgepodge random things that are not guided by long-term strategic thinking, seems to be the biggest sort of strategic political blunder, and waste of a good opportunity that was seized maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Okay, I agree. I cannot agree more, in fact. And I mean, you put it in. I mean, I could sign that. That's put my signature below that statement that you just made. I mean, this is the picture. It's not easy,
No.
but I mean, defense industry, defense technology, defense acquisition decisions are indeed long term. When we say long term, it's not 2, 3, 5 years. We are talking about 10, 15 years time spans. And if you start making your decisions on the basis of daily or weekly considerations, okay, at most monthly, changing your position and your calculations every couple of months. This does not fare well for the defense policy, defense technology, and your overall defense posture. And this is probably the danger.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good place to stop here. We could talk for hours more, and I do want to, but we have been talking for a while, and I think it might be a nice place to stop. We should definitely have you back again to perhaps unpack some of these more, because this is a fascinating subject, and to go more into details of it will be quite interesting. But I'm also conscious of your time, and as well as our audience's time. Not everyone might be as enamored as ourselves in the intricacies or the technical details of it. But Sitka, thank you very much once again for coming here and joining us, and for this really great overview of both the sort of evolution of Turkish defense industry and the problems that it is facing today.
I thank you, Balkan. That was a real pleasure. I took it more like a friendly chat and catching up with the topic, something we couldn't do for quite some years now. I
Exactly.
appreciate for your time
Exactly.
and the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And for the audience, please don't forget to subscribe for the for our channel, and continue to follow us on Twitter at MTS Carlton, so that you can be aware of our events at the Center in Modern Turkish Studies, public events, as well as our Talking Turkish series. Until next time, take care.